Look, Pokemon's going on 25 years, and in that time, the main games of the franchise have had a ton of different directors that shaped the vision of each release to give them a unique place in the series' history. Though today, we look to the future, and I'm going to delve deep into all the information I have regarding Game Freak's current state of development to get to the bottom of that big question. Who exactly is going to be the one behind the Sinnoh Remakes? Right. Select and make your first pick. Well, I got the picture. Are you ready? Go! I already made a video on who all of Pokemon's previous directors are and what they're good at, so go watch that if you can't tell me who this guy is. Only like 23% of my viewers are subscribed, so don't worry, I'm not going to flame you if you haven't seen it. Might want to fix that though, because you're not going to get this talk from anyone else on this hell site, that's for damn sure. As much as I wish that wasn't the case. Anyway, to pinpoint who exactly is going to be working on the Gen 4 remakes, you know, if they exist, the most recent games over at Game Freak will tell us pretty much all we need to know. That being said, Sword and Shield in particular had a developmental timeline that is an absolute travesty, so I guess I gotta bust out Photoshop again. The game started pre-production right around the time Sun and Moon was released. We know this because it's been plainly stated, and also because every single new generation Pokemon game has had 3 years of development time. At this point, we've got 3 major teams working on mainline games for the series. Team A is what I typically call a lot of the older staff that have been with the series for a long time. Think Ohmori, Nishida, Morimoto, and so on. There's a few exceptions to Team A that are more recent members of the staff that have made an impact on the newer entries in the series, such as Kazumasa Iwao or James Turner. Team B are the ones that at the time were working on Ultra Sun and Moon, as well as Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. The Ultra games aren't exactly notable given that they wrapped up shortly before Sword and Shield finished its pre-production, but it's still important to contrast that team with the other split of Team B, who worked on the Let's Go games. Again, some crossover happened at some point, but the main takeaway is that much of its team were newer staff that likely played the original Yellow version when they were younger. And don't worry, I'll get on to why this is important in a minute. With all of this in mind, we've got to consider the amount of work that people typically take on at a time and whether it's appropriate to apply them to the staff behind the Sinnoh remakes. Take Nabana for example. For generations 7 and 8, his biggest contributions were to Pokemon design, which is typically done during the very early stages of pre-production, aka within the first year. Besides that, Nabana also worked on the 3D map graphics for every game in the series since Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, though his biggest work was as the lead of the map graphics team in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. This means that at the latest, Nabana hasn't had a lead role in a project since Let's Go, despite being featured very prominently in articles and interviews up until the game's release alongside Masuda himself, who as we all know was the director for those games. And so you're probably asking, Lewis, why does any of this shit matter? This is a stupid dope mix. I've been waiting for this. Engage. Well, if he hasn't had a lead role on a project since mid-2018 at the latest as part of Team B, you know, the people that are mostly responsible for Pokemon's remakes, then surely within the 3-year gap between then and now, it would make more sense for him to have some big role as part of the staff on Game Freak's 2021 release. So in short, the guy who led the charge for Let's Go's art style as far as the world was concerned is highly possible to make a lead appearance on the remakes for Diamond and Pearl, which is pretty huge to consider, right? Remember when I said earlier about Team B mainly being constructed of newer staff that played the originals growing up? Well, I think we're going to see a lot of that staff work on the Sinnoh remakes for that exact reason. Even with just this basic pattern-related guesswork, we can largely speculate on how the Diamond and Pearl remakes are going to look. As a result of having a more blocky Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee-centric art style, this also has a knock-on effect on the level design, which puts into question how Sinnoh's strengths and weaknesses as a region will be maintained in that transition. If Nabana truly is the map graphics leader for the Gen 4 remakes, are we going to see any interpretation of a wild area from Sword and Shield, given the game's art style and willingness to maintain the original game's level design to a fault? Truth is, we don't know for certain, but given Nabana's track record on Let's Go, I'd imagine he wants to be very faithful provided he's working on the Sinnoh remakes, and that's provided they're even coming out to begin with. In all fairness, that's just one example that I've presented in some detail, and I'd be here all day if I gave that level of attention to every single possible person that works at Game Freak. So instead, I'll fire off people who I'm pretty confident are open for work on the Sinnoh remakes, or at least have been for some time. In terms of director, I'd say Masuda is probably not going to be it, given how we said Let's Go was the last time he's been a director on a Pokemon game. Whilst that's pretty unfortunate given that he directed the original Diamond and Pearl, his choice would naturally have a trickle-down effect on the way the games are developed as a whole. In that very same interview, Masuda talks about how he specifically picked out Shota Kageyama as the person to remaster the soundtrack for Kanto. Without Masuda in the director's chair, that decision making probably won't happen. Music-wise, the Gen 4 remakes are likely to be a mixture of the same Game Freak members that have worked on previous games, but it's fucking impossible to tell who exactly that's gonna be given the circumstances of Sword and Shield's DLC. I know for certain that there's at least one currently unannounced Game Freak Gear project going on, possibly two, which means that quite literally anything can happen when it comes to who is going to rearrange what for Sinnoh. Going back to the game's director, we can immediately rule out a few from the series past pretty easily. Tajiri hasn't worked on a game since Gold and Silver, and Ohmori is most likely slaving away at Generation 9. Hiroyuki Tani is also out of time given that they just got done with the DLC. Kawaichi Maru is still in the running, but I'd highly doubt it given that his last role as a director was over a decade ago. And he's still only really contributing to the communication features for the first games of each generation. Still would be nice to come full circle and see Platinum's director work on what is likely the final return to Sinnoh. That leaves Morimoto, Iwao, and Uno as the three remaining that have a worthwhile chance to be a director for the Gen 4 remakes.
Final round. Go for it.
It does hurt my heart to say this, but Shigeki Morimoto is probably the least likely of the three to be director. In a previous video, I talked about how he may have been considered for a Pokémon Z back in 2015, so it's still largely possible that he'd be down to direct a Team B game. All things considered, he might be the best to ever do it, having directed Emerald and Heart Gold and Soul Silver, so it's a shame that he's the least likely out of the three in my opinion. For second most likely, I'm gonna say Takao Uno. Even though the last game he directed was all the way back in Black and White 2, I'm pretty confident in saying that he'd be a perfect fit for the Generation 4 remakes. Going back to interviews from around the time Diamond and Pearl were coming out, it's clear that there was a lot of effort that he personally invested into realizing those games on the DS hardware. See, I'd say it paid off, but given the way that game runs, as well as Platinum's various improvements, it wouldn't surprise me if he really wanted another crack at it to get the style just right. Finally, the most likely candidate for a Generation 4 Remakes director, in my opinion, is definitely Kazumasa Iwao. His debut as a director was in 2017's Ultra Sun and Moon, which completely knocked it out of the park when taking an existing game and massively expanding on it in terms of content. He was also the planning director for Pokémon Sword and Shield, which meant that he handled Dynamaxing and the overall balance for those games. Regardless of what you think of Dynamax in particular, it's pretty obvious that the Generation 8 interpretations of those games will have them in some form. But the Sinnoh region would need a lot of overhauling to accommodate for the massive gym stadiums, power spots, and balancing updates that would need to come with it. Therefore, it would stand to reason that the man behind Dynamaxing tackles Sinnoh in order to update it in that regard. So Iwao is a pretty safe bet, but I wouldn't be completely surprised if they threw a curveball at us. Which, to be fair, was exactly what they did with the DLC. For more of a wildcard prediction, I wouldn't be too surprised if even Nabana was straight up the director for future Diamond and Pearl remakes, given everything that we've already been over. Truth is, we're in a fascinating time for the series right now, given the fact that Game Freak has to openly respond to the biggest criticism they've ever had to face. On top of trying new methods like DLC on a brand new console that they're simply not used to when compared to the 3DS. The future is so uncertain, and to me at least, that's why it's exciting to be a Pokemon fan right now. Mind you, that doesn't exactly speak to the quality of the series, but new shit coming out just gives me a lot to talk about, and that's always fun. Like, I just made a whole video talking about the staff behind a game that might not even exist in any capacity. And I can only hope that you guys enjoyed some sort of speculation on here. I mean, hey, by the end of the month, I'm pretty confident that we'll have an answer to that big question. Don't know how to end this video except to say thank you, because all of the kind of words and the appreciation for the most recent upload has just been insane through Patreon, Twitter, Discord, etc. And as I said last time, it finally feels so good to get back into the swing of things. Thank you so much.